before I begin, that door back there, it actually does have, there's a reason why it's not just me being messy. That stuff at the bottom, it has if there's nothing there, it has a massive, strip of dagger-like bright light, and it'd be way too distracting if nothing was covering that up, not just for me, but when I'm doing the video, but for people watching. And so if you've ever wondered why is that there, it's actually not me being messy, it's actually for a reason. So going back to what this video is actually about, symbols, ancient symbols and runes. We're actually going to do an entire playlist with a bunch of different videos that will go in depth and dissect a lot of this stuff. But this one is just kind of get your feet wet and tell you the basics of it. And I don't know when I'm going to be able to get to all that. Honestly, I'm still in it's a brand new channel, and I'm still in the process of creating new playlists, and no one playlist is complete. So I'm still adding more videos onto all these different playlists, and then adding new playlists. So it's going to be a while probably, and I hate to, if you're trying to find the answer to something, I hate to be honest with you, but it's probably going to be a while. So this in general in video is going to just cover everything, the really important stuff about ancient symbols and runes and how they differ from the more modern day symbols and runes, and kind of their purpose, and just well, it's hard to really put into words, so let's just go ahead and start. So basically, when you're comparing these modern day paganism to ancient paganism, if you haven't watched any of my other videos, it's worth mentioning just in case people haven't watched any of my other videos, because it is really important. If you haven't seen that, I talk about how the modern day paganism is basically like looking at something like this through a very narrow channel, a field of vision. You don't see the entire picture, and sometimes the little tiny bit that you do see has gotten hazy and construed from the truth. There can be just missing information, or there can actually be something where people have unfortunately put it under a magnifying glass and decided to twist it and warp it into something it was never meant to be. But is it always like that? No. It's a lot of times modern paganism and ancient paganism are the same. They have the same, it's what I would call accurate, because they've got the same. So it's not always different from one another, but it can be night and day difference, and that cannot be any more true than with symbols and runes. Some are the same, many are just night and day different. When it's ancient paganism, you're taking what I really rather call traditional, because you're taking what our ancestors believed and knew to be their wisdom, their knowledge. You're taking that information, and a lot of that information was lost and forgotten, and you are basically relying on an ancestral field of most of us have to really, unless we've had some kind of past life where we can do some kind of past life regression and remember what we did way back then. But really most of us are getting some kind of guidance from some kind of ancestral guide, and it doesn't have to be necessarily hereditary, but somebody who used to know everything as one whole picture instead of a bunch of broken pieces shattered all over the place with a lot missing. It's before everything fell apart. It's before the witch hunts. It killed so many people that literally most of that knowledge and wisdom just died out with them, and the few amount of people that were still left to carry on that knowledge, a lot of them didn't even pass it down to their children in fear that it would just make the children an even bigger target. Then you have the Abrahamics that don't do any favor, a lot of unfortunately influenced, and I hate to say it, but influenced, this pagan belief has gotten influenced by Abrahamic in the modern day, unfortunately. Then you've got the Satanists that don't do us any favor, because they basically take the Abrahamic fear and play around with it as if it was a game, and just buy into it on purpose. You have Abrahamic saying, in a fear-based reality, and then they're afraid of it, and then the Satanists are like, oh, well, this seems like fun, we'll just take advantage of that and make it come true. Basically, I can't explain what I really mean by that, and make it come true and really isn't really the best terminology, but they've used that to their advantage, let's just put it that way. They've taken whatever the Abrahamics believe to be evil, and they've latched onto it because they that's all they want to do is evil stuff. So basically, none of that does any of us any favors, and on top of that, you have these literal historical events that have tried to wipe all knowledge of these ancient symbols away. There used to be old manuscripts and books and things about what all these different symbols from all around the world meant, and most of them were burned and destroyed. Only a few copies still exist, and I'm not joking. I actually was told this by somebody who wanted to write a book about it. She wanted to write a book about how symbols are so misunderstood, and how there's this unnatural fear around them, at least in the Abrahamic realm, which is most of, let's face it, modern day society. She wanted to write a book about it because she was a psychologist, and she I guess found it psychologically interesting, and she was talking about how even just to get the information she needed to write that book, she needed to look up a lot of these symbols and get more information and about the history. And she went to the library and they would not let her look at those books without a special permit. So she had to go get a special permit and then come back. And we're not talking about a third world country that this exists. This was England. I mean, that's where it happened. So the small amount that people have still preserved isn't even open to the general public. I mean, that's to me quite controlling and a red flag there, but anyway, it's taking all of this and making it nearly impossible for the average person just to know the truth about said symbols, said runes, said whatever. And really the only way nowadays that you can remember all that lost stuff is if you have some kind of ancestral guidance. It doesn't have to be hereditary ancestry, but somebody, usually a spirit, or somebody who is an old soul, like me, who has had a lot of past lives, who can maybe pull from their past lives and extract some information. But even me, most of the information I get is through some kind of ancestral guidance. And you have to be guided and you have to be taught, and those are we talked about a long time ago that our teachers don't always have to be someone physically standing over your shoulder telling you what to do. They can be spirits, they can be totems, they can be just nature itself. So it's this big issue where people don't understand. They're very narrow-minded. They, well, everyone says that it can only be this way, and that's the only way that it can be because they said so. Well, if you wind back like 200 years, at least, maybe further, I'd say there's enough information there, just 200 years ago, that in today's current time versus 200 years ago, the truth of what we know is about 5%, maybe 10%. And a lot of it isn't even true, it's construed. But the stuff that's actually accurate is like 5 or 10%. And then 200 years ago, we had probably 75%. And then 300, 400 years ago, it was nearly 100%. So it's unfortunately unraveling quite quickly that we've lost all of it. And again, it is a lot due to the witch hunts, because people just continue to less and less and less until there's not anyone else to. So you have to look at it like that. You have to be open-minded and look at it like that and say, okay, something is probably missing here, and I might not know the real answer to something. If you are just going by whatever someone tells you, no, you have to investigate. You have to find out for yourself. You have to test it before you know for sure the answer. And knowing the hidden truth, I have a video about that. You'll need to know that basic skill in order to learn what these symbols and runes really mean. Now, that being said, ancient runes versus modern day runes. Let's just get into just runes for a minute. Modern day runes, people have certain runes that are just always mean something. But even then, the interpretation can be left up to interpretation to a certain degree. Well, ancient runes, there may or may not be, a lot of times there isn't, but there may or may not be a knowledge of what that rune means. There may not be a definition. You may not be able to look it up. And you have to sense the energy of that rune and interpret it by sensing that energy. And runes don't usually have just one very specific meaning either, not ancient runes. They can be manipulated to be used for several different reasons, but the baseline energy is always going to be the same. There are certain ancient runes that were meant for specific purposes. And then there are ones that are just simply created by an individual. But nowadays, most of them have been created over and over and over again. That really, you can't, even if you think it's new, it's not. It's been carved out before. It's been drawn out before, oddly enough, for similar intent. Runes are odd because the intent makes it what it is. And you could have someone 3,000 years ago that drew the first rune, said rune for something, and then say that's been forgotten for 2,000 years, and all of a sudden someone else comes along and draws the same thing. The magic in it is bizarre because it will reflect that same intent. When you start working with runes, 9 times out of 10, even if you try your hardest to make something new, you're gonna draw something very, very old. Runes set things in stone, and they add protection and power to something. The vast meaning of it is so vast that I can't even really explain it. They do have a different purpose than symbols. They are separated in their own category.